The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Los Angeles Superior Court, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that usually brought routine cases and predictable outcomes. But today would be different. Today would be the day when privilege collided with consequences in the most shocking way imaginable, broadcast live to millions of viewers who were about to witness something they would never forget. Judge Judith Sheindlin sat at her bench, reviewing case files before the morning session began. Her assistant, a young woman named Sarah, approached with a stack of documents and a concerned expression. "Your Honor, heads up on this one," Sarah said, her voice lowering slightly. "The defendant's attorney has already filed 3 motions before the case even starts. She's been difficult with everyone in the courthouse, very demanding, very aggressive about her status." Judge Judy looked up from the file, her sharp eyes narrowing with interest. This wasn't unusual. She dealt with difficult people every single day, but there was something in Sarah's tone that suggested this case carried a different weight. "What's the basic situation?" Judy asked, setting down her pen. "It's a civil case, but it involves a police officer," Sarah explained. "The defendant, Victoria Chen, wife of real estate developer Marcus Chen, allegedly assaulted Officer James Rodriguez during a traffic stop. There's also a component about civil damages the officer is seeking." Judge Judy's eyebrows raised slightly. An assault case involving a police officer didn't usually come to civil court in this manner, but the procedural details would become clear soon enough. She pulled the complete file toward her and began reading with the focused intensity that had made her famous. As she reviewed the incident report, photographs, and witness statements, her expression grew more serious. The incident had occurred 2 weeks earlier on Sunset Boulevard, one of Los Angeles's most famous streets. Victoria Chen had been driving a white Mercedes-Benz S-Class, a vehicle worth more than most people's homes, with temporary registration that had expired 3 days prior. Officer James Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran of the Los Angeles Police Department, had conducted a routine traffic stop for the expired registration. He approached the vehicle professionally, displayed his badge, and requested the driver's license and vehicle registration. What happened next would be captured on 3 different cameras: the police car's dashboard camera, the officer's body camera, and a cell phone video recorded by a bystander who happened to be waiting at the nearby bus stop. The footage was crystal clear, unambiguous, and absolutely damning. Victoria Chen's face had turned red almost immediately when the officer explained the reason for the stop. Her voice had risen as she told Officer Rodriguez that he was making a serious mistake, that he clearly didn't understand who he was dealing with, and that her husband would have his badge for this harassment. When the officer remained professional and simply repeated his request for documentation, Victoria had opened her car door, stepped out onto the street, and without warning, had raised her hand and slapped Officer Rodriguez directly across the face with enough force that his head turned from the impact. The body camera captured the sound perfectly, a sharp crack that echoed in the afternoon air. It also captured Officer Rodriguez's professional response, stepping back, placing his hand on his duty belt, and immediately calling for backup while maintaining his composure. It captured Victoria's continued shouting, her claims that she would destroy his career, that the department would regret this, and that money would solve this problem like it always did. Now, in Judge Judy's courtroom, those 2 individuals sat on opposite sides of the room. Officer Rodriguez occupied a chair near the plaintiff's table, wearing his full dress uniform, his posture straight, and his expression calm, despite the serious nature of the case. On the other side sat Victoria Chen in a tailored white suit that probably cost more than Officer Rodriguez's monthly salary. Her attorney, a high-powered defense lawyer named Gerald Morrison, sat beside her, looking supremely confident. Victoria's body language was completely different from Officer Rodriguez's. She sat with her arms crossed, occasionally rolling her eyes, whispering comments to her attorney, and giving off an air of complete disdain for the proceedings. She seemed to genuinely believe that being in this courtroom was a terrible inconvenience, that her time was being wasted, and that the entire situation was beneath her level of importance. The courtroom itself was filled with people. Reporters occupied the gallery, their cameras ready. Support came for Officer Rodriguez from several fellow officers who sat in the back rows. There was an energy in the room, a sense that something significant was about to happen. Judge Judy entered and everyone stood. She was a striking figure in her black robes, and her face carried that expression of focused intensity that viewers had come to recognize over decades of television. "Good morning," Judge Judy said, settling into her seat. "Let's discuss what we're here about today. We have a civil case involving an alleged assault. Officer Rodriguez is seeking damages for physical harm, emotional distress, and legal costs related to this incident. Is that correct?" Officer Rodriguez's attorney stood and confirmed that this was accurate. Gerald Morrison stood for the defense and began his opening statement with the kind of dismissive tone that immediately made Judge Judy's jaw tighten. "Your Honor, this entire case is a gross overreaction to a simple misunderstanding between two people having a bad day. My client, Mrs. Chen, is a respected member of the community, a philanthropist, and a woman of considerable standing. She would never intentionally assault anyone. What happened on Sunset Boulevard was a momentary loss of composure that has been blown completely out of proportion by a vindictive police officer seeking to punish her for what amounts to a traffic stop mix-up." Judge Judy raised her hand. "Let's not characterize the evidence as blown out of proportion before we've actually reviewed it. Officer Rodriguez, please tell the court exactly what happened on the day in question." Officer Rodriguez stood with military-like precision. His voice was calm, measured, and professional as he recounted the events. He explained that he had conducted a routine traffic stop based on expired registration. He stated that he had approached the vehicle professionally, displayed his identification, and made a courteous request for the driver's license and vehicle registration. He described how the driver had become increasingly hostile, making threats about his career and his future. He detailed how the driver had exited the vehicle without permission and without any provocation beyond the simple traffic stop had struck him across the face with an open hand. "I maintained my composure," Officer Rodriguez said, his voice steady. "I did not respond with any physical action. I simply stepped back, called for backup, and documented the incident properly. This was not about me seeking revenge or punishment. This is about accountability. What happened to me was wrong. If we allow people to strike police officers because they're upset about a traffic stop, we're undermining the entire foundation of law and order." Judge Judy nodded, making notes. "Officer Rodriguez, you have 15 years of service. How many times have you been struck by someone during a traffic stop?" "This is the first time, Your Honor," Officer Rodriguez replied. "In 15 years, I've never had anyone physically assault me." Judge Judy turned to the defense table. "Mrs. Chen, your turn. What's your version of events?" Victoria Chen's attorney stood, but she waved him off dismissively. "I can speak for myself, Gerald," she said, her tone dripping with arrogance. She stood, straightening her jacket, and looked at Judge Judy with barely concealed contempt. "Your Honor, I appreciate the formality of this court, but I think you should understand the context of what happened. I was having a terrible day. My assistant had given me the wrong registration information. I was stressed, and when this officer approached my car with an attitude, I simply had an emotional reaction. Women are allowed to have emotional reactions. That doesn't make us criminals." Judge Judy's expression didn't change, but her pen tapped once against her desk. "Mrs. Chen, did you strike Officer Rodriguez?" Victoria hesitated for a fraction of a second, clearly calculating the best response. "I may have made contact with him, yes, but I didn't strike him in any way that was intended to cause harm. It was more of a gesture expressing my frustration." "A gesture," Judge Judy repeated slowly. "Let's watch the video." The courtroom screens came alive, the body camera footage played, and the sound was unmistakable. There was no ambiguity. There was no interpretation needed. Victoria Chen had deliberately exited her vehicle, walked toward Officer Rodriguez, raised her hand, and struck him across the face with clear intent and significant force. Her facial expression in the video showed anger, not accident. The physical motion showed purpose, not a mere gesture. When the video ended, silence filled the courtroom. Judge Judy looked at Victoria over her glasses. "That's a gesture expressing frustration?" "Your Honor, the camera angle is misleading," Gerald Morrison interjected. "The body camera is positioned in a way that exaggerates the force of the contact." Judge Judy held up a hand. There's also a bystander video. Should we watch that one too? The second video played. It was shot from a different angle, clearly showing the same incident from a completely independent perspective. If anything, it made Victoria's action look even more deliberate. Her face was clearly visible, twisted with anger, and her arm movement was controlled and purposeful. Judge Judy sat back in her chair. So we have 3 different camera angles, all showing the same thing. 3 cameras from 3 different sources, and they all show you striking an officer during a traffic stop. Mrs. Chen, I'm going to ask you directly, did you intentionally strike Officer Rodriguez? Victoria's face had gone pale. She looked at her attorney, who gave her a subtle nod that seemed to mean something like, admit nothing. But before he could speak, Victoria made a decision that would define the rest of this case. She stood up. You know what? She said, her voice rising. I don't appreciate your tone, Your Honor. I came to this court expecting a fair hearing, but instead I'm being treated like a criminal. I have done nothing wrong. Officer Rodriguez was disrespectful, he was rude, and yes, I reacted. But I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by someone in a robe who clearly has already made up their mind. The courtroom gasped. Several reporters leaned forward. Judge Judy's expression changed. Her face grew very still, and her eyes became very sharp. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried an edge like a blade. Sit down, Mrs. Chen. Victoria didn't sit down. Instead, she continued speaking. I won't sit down. This entire proceeding is a waste of time. My attorney has already explained that this was a misunderstanding. I'm sure we can settle this matter with some kind of financial arrangement. How much does the officer want? Name a figure. My husband can handle this. Sit down, Judge Judy repeated, her voice now carrying a dangerous tone that everyone in the courtroom recognized as a warning. Victoria looked at her attorney for support, but Gerald Morrison's face had gone pale. He was already trying to place a gentle hand on her arm, silently urging her to stop talking, but Victoria shook him off. I'm a victim here, Victoria said, her voice shrill now. I'm being persecuted because I'm wealthy, because I'm married to a prominent businessman, and because this officer has some kind of vendetta against people like us. This is discrimination, and my lawyer will be filing countersuits against this entire police department. Judge Judy stood up. She stood slowly, and everyone in the courtroom understood that something significant was happening. This wasn't a routine standing up. This was a movement filled with purpose and authority. She looked directly at Victoria Chen, and her expression was absolutely cold. Mrs. Chen, Judge Judy said, her voice steady and precise, you are in contempt of court. You have refused to sit when ordered. You have made threats. You have shown complete disrespect for this court and for the rule of law. I am holding you accountable for that right now. Victoria's eyes widened. You can't do that. I didn't do anything. You did do something, Judge Judy said, still standing. You struck a police officer. That's assault. You're refusing to accept responsibility. That's contempt. You're making threats against the legal system. That's additional contempt. And you're sitting in my courtroom acting like the rules don't apply to you because your husband is wealthy. Judge Judy turned to the bailiff. I want you to stay exactly where you are, Mrs. Chen. Don't move. She looked at Officer Rodriguez. Officer, I've reviewed all the evidence. The video evidence is irrefutable. You did nothing wrong. You conducted a professional traffic stop. The defendant struck you without justification. I'm finding for you in this case. Judge Judy returned to her seat and opened a legal pad. Her pen moved quickly as she wrote, calculating the judgment. Officer Rodriguez, you are awarded $10,000 in damages for the assault. Additionally, you are awarded $3,000 for your medical expenses, even though thankfully your injuries were minor. You are awarded $2,000 for the emotional distress caused by this incident, which was both shocking and unprofessional. That's a total of $15,000. Furthermore, Judge Judy continued, her eyes still on Victoria, I am assessing an additional $10,000 in punitive damages against Mrs. Chen because this case involved not just the assault, but a complete refusal to take responsibility, threats against the court system, and an attempt to use wealth as a shield against accountability. Victoria's face went white. That's $25,000? That's absurd. Judge Judy raised her gaze to meet Victoria's directly. It is not absurd. It is justice. You struck a police officer because you believed your wealth and your status made you above the law. You believed that money could solve any problem. You believed that you could threaten people and face no consequences. Today, you are learning that you were wrong about all of those things. Judge Judy's voice grew quieter, which somehow made it even more powerful. Let me explain something to you, Mrs. Chen. Officer Rodriguez has spent 15 years serving this community. He has faced danger. He has made a difference. He did nothing wrong to you except ask you for your vehicle registration. Your reaction to a simple routine traffic stop was to commit assault. Your response to being held accountable has been to make threats and show contempt. She paused, letting her words settle into the courtroom. This is about far more than a traffic stop. This is about whether people with money get to operate by different rules than everyone else. This is about whether wealth creates immunity from consequences. In this courtroom, the answer is no. Judge Judy turned to her clerk. I want a judgment entered immediately. $25,000 payable within 30 days. If Mrs. Chen cannot pay, garnishment proceedings will begin against her household accounts and her husband's business assets. You can't do that, Victoria shouted, her voice cracking. My husband will fight this. We have lawyers. We have resources. Then use your resources to pay the judgment, Judge Judy said calmly. That's what money is for. Officer Rodriguez will now be able to pay for counseling if he needs it. He will be compensated for the assault that was perpetrated against him. He will have validation that he did nothing wrong and that this court takes his situation seriously. She turned to address the courtroom. This case teaches us something important. Every person, regardless of their bank account, regardless of their social position, regardless of their connections, must follow the law. When you break the law, there are consequences. When you assault someone, that's a crime. When you refuse to take responsibility, when you threaten the court system, when you try to use money to intimidate people into backing down, those actions have additional consequences. Judge Judy looked at Victoria one final time. You came into this courtroom with the belief that your situation was different, that the normal rules didn't apply to you. You're about to learn that you were wrong. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the entire courtroom. Reporters immediately jumped up, cameras flashing. Officer Rodriguez stood and shook the hand of his attorney. Several police officers in the gallery stood and applauded, a moment of support that the bailiff didn't even attempt to stop. Victoria sat frozen in her chair, her face a mixture of shock and rage. Her attorney was already making phone calls, likely informing her husband of the judgment. The contrast between the beginning of this case and the end was stunning. Victoria had entered believing her wealth would protect her, that her status would shield her, that money could solve everything. She was leaving having learned a very different lesson. The moment Judge Judy's gavel struck the bench, the courtroom erupted into a controlled chaos of camera flashes and whispered conversations. Officer James Rodriguez sat quietly for a moment, allowing the reality of the judgment to settle over him. $25,000. Not just compensation for his pain, but validation that what happened to him mattered, that his service mattered, that the law applied equally to everyone, regardless of their bank account balance. As he stood and turned to leave the courtroom, several fellow officers approached him with handshakes and quiet words of support. One senior officer, Captain Maria Santos, who had been sitting in the gallery, placed her hand on his shoulder. You handled this with complete professionalism, Rodriguez. That's what real integrity looks like, she said, her voice carrying genuine respect. Officer Rodriguez nodded, his eyes slightly glistening with emotion, but his military bearing remained intact. Meanwhile, Victoria Chen sat frozen in her seat, her attorney making urgent phone calls, likely informing her husband Marcus that his wife had just become $25,000 more expensive. Her perfectly styled appearance seemed to crack under the weight of the judgment. The white Chanel suit, the diamond earrings, the designer handbag, none of it had protected her. None of it had made the law different for her. The reality of accountability was something Victoria Chen had clearly never experienced before, and the shock was written across her face. The immediate fallout. Within hours of the verdict being recorded, the case exploded across social media and news outlets. By evening, Clips of Victoria striking Officer Rodriguez had been viewed over 3 million times. The hashtag #JackJustice for Rodriguez trended on Twitter within 2 hours. News stations led their broadcasts with the story, "Millionaire's wife ordered to pay $25,000 for assaulting police officer." What surprised many observers was how quickly the narrative shifted from a simple assault case to something much larger. Victoria's refusal to take responsibility, her contemptuous behavior in the courtroom, and her attempt to use wealth as a shield against consequences had struck a nerve with the public. People who had never met Officer Rodriguez felt personally invested in his vindication because his case represented something universal: the struggle against entitlement. The Los Angeles Police Department released an official statement supporting Officer Rodriguez and praising his professional conduct throughout the incident. Officer Rodriguez conducted a lawful traffic stop and handled a volatile situation with exemplary composure, the statement read. The judgment handed down today affirms that assault against law enforcement officers will not be tolerated, regardless of the perpetrator's status or wealth. But the real story was just beginning to unfold. Marcus Chen's damage control. Victoria's husband, Marcus Chen, is a real estate developer worth approximately $80 million. His business empire includes luxury apartment complexes, high-end retail properties, and commercial real estate throughout Los Angeles. He is on the boards of several charities and is known in certain circles as a philanthropist. However, Marcus Chen is also someone who values his reputation fiercely and conducts his business through a network of lawyers, accountants, and publicists designed specifically to protect his image. When he learned about the judgment, his first instinct was damage control. He had his attorney file an immediate appeal of Judge Judy's decision, claiming that the judgment was excessive and that Victoria had simply had an emotional reaction that didn't warrant such a severe financial penalty. He hired a public relations firm to begin crafting a narrative that portrayed his wife as having made a mistake, but also as someone being persecuted by the media. However, Marcus's damage control strategy backfired almost immediately. When he hired a publicity team to defend Victoria's actions, more clips surfaced. A video emerged from a different angle showing Victoria not just striking Officer Rodriguez, but doing so with an expression of pure contempt and anger. Another video surfaced of her attempting to intimidate the officer by repeatedly stating that her husband would destroy his career. A third video showed her screaming at other police officers who arrived at the scene. Each new video confirmed what the original footage had already made clear. This was not a momentary loss of composure. This was a pattern of behavior driven by entitlement and the belief that rules didn't apply to her. Professional consequences. The judgment had financial consequences, but it had other consequences as well. Victoria Chen held a position on the board of the Los Angeles Arts Foundation, a prestigious nonprofit organization. When board members reviewed the footage and saw her behavior in court, particularly her contemptuous attitude toward Judge Judy and her refusal to accept responsibility, they convened an emergency meeting. 3 days after the judgment, Victoria Chen received a formal letter asking for her resignation from the board. The letter was polite but firm, stating that her recent behavior was inconsistent with the values of the organization and that her continued involvement would be detrimental to the foundation's reputation and mission. Victoria didn't resign. Instead, she had her attorney demand that the board provide specific reasons for her removal and threatened legal action. This decision proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. The board, feeling attacked, decided to formally remove her rather than accept her resignation. They released a public statement explaining that they had terminated her position due to her demonstrated lack of judgment and her contemptuous conduct toward the legal system. The statement was careful not to defame her, but it was also unambiguous in its message. Victoria Chen's behavior had crossed a line that even wealthy people couldn't cross without facing consequences. Similar developments occurred at other organizations where Victoria held positions. The Country Club of Los Angeles, where she had been a member for 12 years, informed her that due to recent events inconsistent with club values, her membership was being reviewed. The letter stated that pending the outcome of the review, she was being placed on temporary suspension. Her social circle began to distance itself. Invitations to charity galas and private events that had once come regularly now stopped arriving. Friends from her country club days began returning her phone calls with less enthusiasm. People who had once competed to be seen with her now preferred to avoid association with her. Officer Rodriguez's healing. While Victoria Chen was experiencing the slow erosion of her social position and professional standing, Officer Rodriguez was experiencing something entirely different. The judgment had validated his experience in a way that no personal vindication could have. He had done nothing wrong. The court had affirmed that. The law had affirmed that. And now, his colleagues, his community, and the public had affirmed that as well. The $25,000, which had seemed like an enormous sum when Judge Judy announced it, became symbolic of something larger than money. It was validation. It was proof that the system could work. It was evidence that even when someone had wealth and lawyers and power, they couldn't simply assault a police officer and walk away without consequences. Officer Rodriguez used a portion of the judgment to pay for counseling. The incident had triggered some PTSD symptoms related to previous dangerous situations he had encountered during his 15 years of service. A therapist specializing in law enforcement trauma helped him process the assault and the subsequent court proceedings. The therapy sessions gave him tools to manage stress and to recognize that what had happened was not his fault. He also used some of the funds to take his family on a vacation, something they hadn't done in years. His wife had stood by him throughout this ordeal, and his children had asked him why someone would hit their father. Being able to explain to them that the court had agreed that it was wrong and that the person who did it had faced consequences helped restore his sense of safety and justice. Officer Rodriguez returned to his job with renewed commitment. His colleagues had rallied around him, and the department had made clear that they supported him completely. He became something of an informal mentor to newer officers, sharing the importance of maintaining professionalism under stress, of documenting incidents carefully, and of trusting that the legal system would back them up when they did their jobs correctly. The broader message. The case of Victoria Chen versus Officer James Rodriguez became more than just a civil judgment. It became a statement about accountability, about the limits of wealth, and about the fact that in America, the law is supposed to apply equally to everyone. The fact that it had to be so dramatically demonstrated to a national audience was both encouraging and disturbing to many observers. Legal experts began analyzing Judge Judy's ruling, and most agreed that it was legally sound. Assault is assault, regardless of the perpetrator's wealth or status. The additional punitive damages were justified given Victoria's refusal to accept responsibility and her contemptuous conduct in court. The judgment sent a message that using wealth to try to intimidate the legal system or to shield yourself from the consequences of your actions would not be tolerated. Social media erupted with discussions about class, wealth, privilege, and justice. People shared their own experiences of witnessing or experiencing entitlement from wealthy people. Teachers talked about students from wealthy families who believed rules didn't apply to them. Small business owners discussed encounters with wealthy clients who refused to pay for services rendered. The Victoria Chen case became a focal point for broader conversations about fairness and accountability. Interestingly, the case also sparked conversations about police conduct and interactions with the public. While Officer Rodriguez's professionalism was universally praised, some observers used the case to discuss how police training emphasizes remaining calm under stress, de-escalating situations, and documenting incidents, all of which Rodriguez had done perfectly. His conduct became a training model for other law enforcement agencies. Financial reality sets. In 30 days after the judgment, the payment deadline arrived. Victoria Chen's attorney attempted to negotiate, requesting an extension and proposing a payment plan. Judge Judy's clerk denied the request, informing them that the judgment must be paid in full or garnishment proceedings would begin immediately. Marcus Chen paid the $25,000. He had no choice. The judgment was legal, the court had authority to enforce it, and attempting to avoid payment would only create additional legal problems. The money was transferred from a joint account to Officer Rodriguez's attorney, and within hours, Officer Rodriguez received notification that the judgment had been satisfied. However, the financial impact didn't end there. Marcus Chen's insurance company refused to cover the judgment, citing a clause that excluded coverage for intentional acts of violence. This meant that the $25,000 came directly from Marcus and Victoria's personal accounts, not from an insurance policy. The fact that wealth didn't shield them from the actual cost of Victoria's actions was not lost on anyone observing the case. The lasting impact. Months after the verdict, when the dust had settled and the media attention had moved on to other cases, the impact of Victoria Chen's judgment remained visible. She was no longer a regular fixture at the country club. She had resigned from her remaining board positions, though whether this was voluntary or the result of informal pressure remained unclear. Her social calendar had dramatically contracted. Marcus Chen's business continued, but with a slightly tarnished reputation. Some potential clients who had been considering working with him chose other developers instead, not wanting their own projects associated with his family's scandal. It wasn't devastating to his business, but it was noticeable. Officer Rodriguez, meanwhile, had moved forward with his life, carrying the validation of the court's judgment with him. He had been promoted to training officer, a position that allowed him to teach newer officers about professionalism, de-escalation, and the importance of documenting incidents carefully. He had become an advocate for proper police conduct, ironically using his experience as a victim of assault to help educate other officers about maintaining composure in difficult situations. The case became part of legal education. Law professors used it as an example of how civil courts can hold people accountable for assault. Judicial training programs reference Judge Judy's ruling as an example of how to handle a defendant who shows contempt of court. Police academies used Officer Rodriguez's conduct as a model for professional behavior under stress, the ultimate lesson. The verdict of $25,000 was not about the money. It was about the principle. It was about the fact that in a country built on the rule of law, no one, not the wealthy, not the powerful, not the well-connected, is above the law. When Victoria Chen struck Officer Rodriguez, she violated that principle. When she refused to accept responsibility, she violated it further. When she tried to use money and legal threats to avoid consequences, she violated it yet again. Judge Judy's judgment was a statement that those violations would not be tolerated. The court would enforce the law equally. The law would apply to everyone, and when someone with wealth and power broke the law, they would face the same consequences as anyone else. Officer Rodriguez had done nothing except ask for documentation during a routine traffic stop. He had done everything correctly. He had remained professional. He had documented the incident, and he had trusted that the legal system would back him up. That trust had been validated. Victoria Chen had believed her wealth would protect her, that her status would shield her, that money could solve any problem. She had learned that she was wrong. $25,000 was a painful but important lesson in a country where the law is supposed to be blind to wealth and power. The case of Victoria Chen versus Officer James Rodriguez stands as a reminder that accountability is not negotiable, that consequences apply to everyone, and that in America, no one is above the law, not even a millionaire's wife.